Some men don't raise their voices, they raise the standard. The glass didn't shatter when it hit the floor, but the sound cut through the bar like something sharper than noise, like disrespect given shape. And for a moment, no one moved, not the bartender wiping down the counter, not the group of men leaning back in polished boots and loud confidence. Not even the girl standing in the center of it all with a quiet stillness that didn't match the way she'd just been treated. Her dress was simple, nothing that belonged in a place where money spoke louder than manners. Her hair slightly undone, as if the night hadn't gone the way she expected. And yet her eyes, they didn't plead, they didn't break, they just watched, calm in a way that didn't make sense to anyone in that room, except one man, sitting 3 stools down, nursing a cheap beer like it had taken more hours to earn than it should have. Marcus Hale didn't look like much, not in a place like this, his jacket worn at the edges, his boots carrying the quiet dust of long days and longer nights, the kind of man people passed without noticing, the kind of man life had already tested more than once. But when the laughter started, low and careless, something shifted, not loud, not dramatic, just a small breath drawn a little deeper than before. And then he stood, no rush, no performance, just movement with purpose, his chair scraping softly against the wooden floor. "You should leave," one of the men said, not to the girl, but to him. Like this was already a joke he had no place in. Marcus didn't answer right away. He stepped forward instead, placing himself between the noise and the silence, between arrogance and dignity. "She already told you no," he said, voice low, steady, the kind of voice that didn't ask for attention but held it anyway. A few heads turned, a few smirks deepened. Someone let out a short laugh. "And who are you supposed to be?" Another voice chimed in, louder this time, testing him, measuring him, waiting for him to shrink. But Marcus didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't play their game. The neon lights above flickered faintly, casting soft blue shadows across his face, the hum of the old jukebox blending with the quiet tension settling into the room, the kind of stillness that comes right before people realize something they didn't expect. "To someone who knows when enough is enough," he said, simple, almost quiet, and somehow that made the laughter thinner, less certain. The girl behind him hadn't stepped away, hadn't said a word, but her presence felt different now. Not smaller, not shaken, just waiting, like she'd seen something like this before, or maybe like she'd been waiting for it. A moment where someone chose decency without knowing the cost. One of the men leaned forward, resting his arm on the bar, studying Marcus like he was deciding whether this was worth pushing further, whether this quiet man was a problem or just another passing inconvenience. But something in Marcus's stillness made that calculation hesitate. Just enough, and in that hesitation, the room changed. Not dramatically, not with applause or shock, but with something subtler. Respect trying to find its way back into a place that had forgotten it. Marcus turned slightly, not fully, just enough to glance at the girl. "You're okay," he said, not asking, not assuming, just offering space for her to stand on her own terms. And for the first time, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I am now," she said. And it wasn't the words that lingered. It was the way she said them, like they carried more weight than anyone there could understand. Marcus nodded once, nothing more, as if that was enough, as if the moment didn't need to be stretched or claimed. And then he stepped back, returning to his place like the night would simply continue, like nothing had shifted. But it had, not in the way the men expected, not in the way the room understood, because what no one in that bar realized, not the ones who laughed, not the ones who watched, not even Marcus himself, was that this quiet decision, this small stand taken without witness or reward, had already set something in motion, something that wouldn't make noise until morning. And when it did, it wouldn't just change the room, it would change his life. The night did not follow him home, but the quiet did, and sometimes that was heavier. Marcus unlocked the door to his apartment just after midnight, the hallway light flickering once before settling into a dull yellow glow, the kind that made everything look older than it was. He stepped inside carefully, closing the door without a sound, as if the world outside did not deserve to follow him in. The air carried the faint scent of laundry detergent and something warm left behind from earlier. A small sign that this space, however modest, still held life. He set his keys down on the narrow wooden table by the door, the surface worn smooth from years of repetition. And for a moment he just stood there, shoulders easing, breath slowing, like a man who had learned to leave his battles at the threshold. In the next room, a soft lamp cast a gentle circle of light over a couch that had seen better days, and beneath a folded blanket, a small figure slept, his son, Noah, 8 years old, curled slightly to one side, one arm wrapped around a worn baseball glove. He refused to sleep without. Marcus stepped closer, his boots silent against the floor, and crouched down just enough to see his son's face, peaceful, untouched by the noise of bars or the sharp edges of grown men's pride. "You did good today, kid," he whispered, not because Noah could hear it, but because some words deserved to exist whether they were answered or not. He reached out and adjusted the blanket, careful, precise, like everything else he did, then stood and moved toward the kitchen sink, the sleeve of his jacket still faintly damp. He peeled it off slowly, revealing the dark stain where the night had left its mark. He turned on the faucet, letting the water run over the fabric, watching as the color thinned, diluted, carried away inch by inch. There was something honest about that, about cleaning what you could and accepting what you could not. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time in a way that did not ask for attention, just consistency. Marcus leaned against the counter, hands resting on the edge, eyes lowered, not in defeat, but in thought. He was not replaying the moment at the bar the way some men would, not building himself into something larger than he was. He was simply asking one quiet question, the kind that shaped a life without ever being spoken out loud. Was it the right thing to do? The answer did not come as a voice. It came as a feeling, steady and unshaken, the same feeling that had guided him through years of choosing less so his son could have more. The same feeling that told him dignity was not something you turned on when it was convenient. It was something you carried even when no one noticed, especially then. He turned off the faucet and wrung out the fabric, setting it aside with the rest of tomorrow's work clothes, because morning would come whether he was ready or not. And morning meant early shifts, packed lunches, school drop-offs, and 100 small decisions that no one would ever see. He glanced once more toward Noah, then reached for the light switch, pausing for half a second as if acknowledging something unseen, something unfinished. And then the room dimmed, settling into silence again, the kind of silence that does not empty a space but fills it with something steady, something real. And somewhere across the city, in a place far removed from worn couches and ticking clocks, a woman who had said very little that night was not sleeping, because for the first time in a long time, she was thinking about a man who had asked for nothing, expected nothing, and still chose to stand. And that kind of quiet strength did not disappear with the night. It followed you into the morning, whether you were ready for it or not. Morning did not arrive with noise. It arrived with routine. And for Marcus Hale, routine was a kind of quiet discipline that held his world together. The alarm on his old phone buzzed at 5:45 a.m., not loud, not urgent, just enough to pull him back from shallow sleep. He reached over and silenced it before it could wake Noah, then sat up slowly, rubbing a hand across his face as the dim gray light of early morning filtered through the thin curtains. The city outside was just beginning to stir, distant traffic humming like a low breath. He stood and moved through the apartment with practiced care, every step measured, every motion familiar. He filled a small pot with water, set it on the stove, and began preparing breakfast. Nothing elaborate, just eggs and toast, but done with the kind of attention that turns simple things into something steady, something reliable. A few minutes later, he walked back to the couch and gently touched Noah's shoulder. "Hey, champ, time to get up." His voice soft but certain. Noah stirred, blinking slowly before offering a sleepy nod. "5 more minutes," he mumbled. Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. "2," he replied, because compromise was another form of care. The morning moved forward in quiet rhythm. The sound of a fork against a plate, the rustle of the backpack being zipped, the soft hum of the coffee maker filling the small space. There was no rush, no raised voices, just a steady flow of moments that built a life piece by piece. By 6:40 a.m., they were out the door, the air crisp, carrying that early chill that woke the senses without asking permission. Marcus walked Noah to school, their pace, unhurried, Their conversation simple, mostly about a spelling test and a science project involving cardboard and imagination. At the school gate, Noah paused, then looked up. "You working late today?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I will be home for dinner." Noah nodded, satisfied, then hesitated just long enough to add, "You always are," and that was it. No big declarations, just trust. Marcus watched him disappear into the building before turning back toward his own day. His job was not glamorous, a maintenance position in a mid-sized office complex downtown. The kind of work that kept things running without anyone noticing who made it possible. He arrived just before 7:30 a.m., clocked in, and began his rounds, checking systems, fixing what needed fixing, moving through hallways that smelled faintly of polish and coffee. People passed him without much attention, some offer a nod, others did not look up at all, and that was fine. Marcus had never needed recognition to do what was right. He worked with the same quiet focus he carried everywhere. Each task completed with care, each detail handled without complaint. But around mid-morning, something unusual shifted. It started. Small A. Conversation between two managers near the break room. Voices lowered but not enough to be unheard. "Did you hear about last night?" One said, "At Crossline Lounge?" The other replied, "Apparently there was some incident." Marcus did not react, did not pause, but he listened, not out of curiosity, but because the tone carried something different. "Security footage got pulled this morning." The first voice continued. "Someone upstairs wanted to review it personally." Marcus moved past them, expression unchanged, but a faint echo of the previous night brushed against his thoughts. Not loud, not demanding, just present, like a question that had not yet been asked. He returned to his work, tightening a loose panel, adjusting a faulty light. But somewhere beneath the surface, something had shifted, not in him, but around him, like the world had quietly taken notice of something he had not intended to show. And miles away, in a glass tower that reflected the rising sun, a woman stood. In front of a large window, watching the city wake beneath her, a tablet in her hand paused on a single frame. A man standing still in the middle of a room that had expected him to move. Her finger hovered just above the screen, not pressing play. Not yet, because sometimes the most important moments were not the ones in motion, but the ones where someone chose who they were without knowing who was watching. And she intended to understand exactly who that man was. The city did not announce its power. It revealed it in layers. And Elena Cross stood at the center of one of those layers, high above the noise. Where glass walls replaced brick and silence carried more authority than raised voices. Her office overlooked 30 blocks of waking streets, sunlight stretching across steel and asphalt like a quiet declaration of control. She stood still, one hand resting lightly against the edge of a polished desk, the other holding a tablet that had not left her. Sighed since dawn, the image on the screen remained paused. A single frame capturing a moment most people would have forgotten by morning, a man stepping forward without hesitation, not to impress, not to prove, but simply because something inside him refused to stay seated. "Play it again," she said, her voice calm, measured, the kind that did not need to be loud to be followed. Across from her, a man in a tailored suit tapped the screen, and the footage moved, the bar lights flickering faintly, voices rising and falling, then settling as Marcus Hale entered the frame, not dramatically, not as a hero, just as a man who had made a decision. Elena watched without interruption, her expression unchanged, but her attention absolute. No escalation, the man beside her noted, almost impressed. He did not provoke, did not posture. Elena did not respond immediately, her eyes tracking the smallest details, the angle of Marcus's shoulders, the steadiness of his stance, the way he spoke without leaning into the moment. "He did not need to," she said finally, and there was something in her tone that suggested she was not just observing, she was measuring. The video ended, returning to stillness. The room itself remained quiet, the low hum of the building's systems barely noticeable beneath the weight of her silence. "Background?" she asked, without looking away from the screen. The man glanced at a file on his own tablet. Marcus Hale, 39, maintenance technician, widower, one child, no criminal record, stable employment, no outstanding debts, no affiliations worth noting. He paused briefly, then added, "Lives modestly." Elena lowered the tablet slightly, considering. No affiliations, she repeated, not as a question, but as a point of interest. That means no leverage, the man replied carefully. Elena set the tablet down on the desk, her fingers resting lightly against its surface. Or it means he chooses his own, she said, her gaze shifting toward the window, where the city continued moving without awareness of the conversation unfolding above it. A brief silence followed, not empty, but deliberate. Do you want us to reach out? The man asked, already anticipating the answer. Elena did not turn back immediately. She allowed the moment to breathe, to settle into something more than impulse. Not yet, she said. People show who they are when no one is watching. She turned then, her eyes steady. I want to know if that was a moment or a pattern. The man nodded, understanding the difference, understanding the weight of that question. Understood, he said, making a note. Elena picked up the tablet once more, her thumb brushing lightly across the edge of the screen, not to replay it, but to hold on to the stillness of that single frame, the moment where a man chose dignity without knowing it would be seen. And the others? She asked, her tone shifting slightly, not colder, but more precise. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second. They have already been addressed, he said, choosing his words carefully. Elena gave a small nod. Not interested in the details, not interested in punishment, because that was never the point. Good, she replied. And then, almost as an afterthought, though nothing she said ever truly was, send someone to the building where he works, she said. Not to speak, just to observe. The man looked up. For how long? Elena turned back toward the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Until I know if yesterday was luck or character. And in that moment, far below, in a hallway that smelled faintly of fresh paint and quiet effort, Marcus Hale adjusted a loose fixture with the same steady hands he had always used, unaware that somewhere above the city, someone had begun to see him not for what he had, but for who he was. And that kind of attention, once given, did not fade. It waited, it watched. And when the time was right, it changed everything. By late afternoon, the building had settled into that familiar rhythm where footsteps softened and conversations thinned, the kind of quiet that only existed when people believed their day was almost over. But Marcus Hale did not measure his work by the clock. He measured it by completion, by the small details no one else noticed, the hinge that no longer creaked, the light that no longer flickered, the door that closed just right. He moved through the corridor on the 4th floor with a steady pace, toolbox in hand, eyes scanning without urgency. Because urgency was not his style, precision was. He stopped at a maintenance panel near the end of the hallway, crouched down, and opened it with practiced ease. The faint hum of electrical current greeted him like an old acquaintance, consistent, predictable. He adjusted a loose connection, tightened a screw half a turn more than necessary, not out of perfectionism, but out of respect for the work itself. Behind him, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and 2 figures stepped out, their shoes striking the floor with a different kind of rhythm, sharper, more deliberate. Marcus did not turn immediately. Not because he ignored people, but because he finished what he started. He closed the panel, stood, and only then glanced back. The man was dressed in a tailored suit, the kind that did not wrinkle even after a long day, his posture straight, his gaze observant without being obvious. Beside him, a woman held a tablet, her expression neutral, both of them out of place in a building that rarely hosted anyone who did not belong to its routine. You are Marcus Hale, the man said, not asking, just confirming. Marcus met his eyes calmly. Yes, he replied. No hesitation, no curiosity layered into the answer, just truth. The man nodded once, as if checking off a detail on a list that had already been written. We have been observing your work, he said, the words measured, careful. Marcus did not react the way most people might. There was no sudden tension, no defensive posture, just a slight shift of attention. Is there a problem? He asked, because in his world, being noticed often came with consequences. The man paused, as if weighing how much to say, then chose the simplest version. No problem, he replied, just interest. The word lingered for a moment, unfamiliar in this context. Marcus tilted his head slightly, not confused, but thoughtful. Interest in maintenance, he asked, and there was no sarcasm in his tone, only genuine clarity. The woman beside the man glanced down at her tablet, then back up, studying Marcus more closely now, as if the question itself had revealed something worth noting. The man allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. Inconsistency, he said, in how a man does small things when no one is watching. Marcus held his gaze, not uncomfortable, not impressed, just present. The hallway lights above cast a soft glow across the scene, highlighting the contrast between polished authority and quiet labor. Everyone is watching something, Marcus replied after a brief pause, his voice steady. Most people just do not admit it. The woman's fingers stilled on the tablet, and for a second, the air shifted, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. The man studied him more carefully now, as if the conversation had moved beyond surface level. And you, he asked, what do you watch? Marcus considered the question, not rushing to answer, because answers like actions carried weight. I watch what needs to be fixed, he said finally, simple, direct, the kind of answer that did not try to impress, the kind that did not need to. The man nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hale, he said, stepping back slightly, signaling the end of the exchange. Marcus gave a small nod in return, already turning back toward his work, because conversations, no matter how unusual, did not change the task in front of him. The two figures walked back toward the elevator, their footsteps fading into the same quiet they had entered, but the woman glanced over her shoulder once, just once, her eyes lingering on Marcus for a fraction longer than necessary, not with judgment, not with curiosity alone, but with recognition. And as the elevator doors closed, the man spoke quietly. It was not just last night, he said. The woman nodded, her gaze still fixed on the reflection of a man who had already returned to his routine. No, she replied. It never is. And somewhere between the closing doors and the steady hum of a building that thought nothing had changed, a decision moved one step closer to being made, not because of a single moment, but because of a pattern that could not be ignored. The evening returned not with fanfare, but with the same quiet rhythm Marcus Hale had come to rely on, the kind that did not demand attention, yet held everything together. The sun had already dipped below the buildings when he stepped out of the service entrance. The sky, painted in fading shades of orange and gray, a cool breeze moving through the streets as the city shifted from work to rest. He walked the familiar route toward home, hands steady at his sides, his mind not crowded with the unusual encounter from earlier. Because Marcus did not chase meaning, he let it reveal itself in time. When he reached his apartment, the hallway light buzzed faintly overhead just like it always did. A small imperfection that no one had fixed yet. He made a mental note. Not because it was his responsibility, but because noticing things had become second nature. Inside, Noah sat at the small table, pencil in hand, a sheet of paper covered in uneven lines and determined effort. You are late, Noah said without looking up, his tone more observant than accusing. Marcus set his keys down and stepped closer. A little, he admitted. Did you eat? Noah nodded, tapping the paper with the eraser. I saved you some. Marcus glanced at the plate on the counter, simple, untouched, waiting, and something in his chest softened. Not dramatically, just enough to remind him what mattered. He sat down across from his son. What are you working on? Noah turned the paper slightly, revealing a drawing of a building, tall, uneven, but full of detail. My teacher said we had to draw where our parents work, he explained. Marcus studied it, recognizing the structure in its imperfect lines. That is pretty accurate, he said, and Noah grinned, satisfied. I made sure the lights were fixed, he added proudly. Marcus nodded. Good. That is important. The room settled into a comfortable quiet, the kind that did not need to be filled. The sound of utensils, the soft scratch of pencil against paper, the steady presence of two lives moving forward together. But somewhere beyond those walls, decisions were no longer waiting. They were moving. In a private office high above the city, Elena Cross stood once again before the window. Though this time she was not holding a tablet, she did not need to replay anything. The pattern had already formed. The man from the hallway, the one who answered questions without trying to impress, the one who returned to his work without lingering on attention. He had confirmed what the night had suggested: consistency, not performance. And that was rare, more rare than power, more rare than wealth. Her reflection in the glass looked composed, controlled, but behind it, something quieter had shifted, not emotion in the way most people understood it, but recognition, the kind that did not happen often. "Set the meeting," she said, her voice calm, final. The man beside her nodded immediately. "Tomorrow morning?" he asked Elena. Considered for half a second, then shook her head. "No," she replied. "He does not chase opportunity." Her gaze returned to the city below, where thousands of lives moved without knowing what was about to change for one of them. "We go to him," she said. And in that decision, there was no hesitation, no doubt, because some people did not need to be brought into a different world. They needed that world to meet them where they stood. Back in the small apartment, Marcus finished his meal and leaned back slightly, watching Noah explain something about his drawing with quiet excitement, unaware that somewhere beyond his routine, beyond the steady choices he made every day, a door had already begun to open, not loudly, not suddenly, but with the kind of certainty that only came when someone had been seen for who they truly were, and the next morning would not arrive like the others, even if it felt exactly the same at first. Morning arrived the way it always did, quiet, steady, without announcement, but there was something beneath it now, something unseen yet already in motion. Marcus Hale woke before the alarm, not because he sensed change, but because discipline had long replaced hesitation in his life. He moved through the apartment with the same calm efficiency, preparing breakfast, waking Noah with a gentle hand, tying routines together like threads that never broke. The world outside looked no different. Traffic lights blinking through early haze, distant engines starting, people stepping into another ordinary day. And that was the nature of moments that mattered most. They never arrived with warning. They blended in until they did not. By 7:10 a.m., Marcus stood outside the school gate, watching Noah disappear into the building with that same quiet trust that had never needed explanation. "See you tonight," Noah had said. And Marcus nodded, because promises were not something he spoke lightly. They were something he lived. He turned and began to walk toward work, his pace even, his mind clear, the city unfolding around him in predictable patterns. But when he reached the corner just one block from the building, something broke that pattern. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. A black sedan sat parked along the curb, polished, still, out of place in a neighborhood where cars carried more years than shine. Marcus did not stop, did not assume. He simply walked past it, because he had learned not to attach meaning to things that had not yet revealed it. But as he passed, the rear door opened, smooth, deliberate, and a voice followed, calm, unmistakable. "Mr. Hale." Marcus paused, not abruptly, just enough to acknowledge the moment. He turned slowly, his expression unchanged, and there she was, stepping out from the car with the same quiet presence he had seen the night before. But everything else had changed: her posture, her clothing, the way the air itself seemed to shift around her. Elena Cross no longer looked like someone out of place. She looked exactly where she belonged, composed, precise, her gaze steady as it met his. Marcus did not speak first. He waited, because he understood something simple: people revealed themselves when given space. Elena took a few steps forward, closing the distance without rushing it. "You walked away," she said, her voice even, not a question, more like an observation placed carefully between them. Marcus nodded once. There was nothing else to do, he replied, simple, direct, no attempt to shape the moment into something larger than it was. Elena studied him. Not his appearance, not his clothes, but his response, the absence of performance in it. "Most people would have stayed," she said, "to explain, to be seen." Marcus held her gaze, steady as before. "I did not do it to be seen," he answered, and the words did not carry pride. They carried truth. A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, but intentional, the kind that allowed meaning to settle instead of being forced. The morning light stretched across the sidewalk, catching the edges of the scene in soft contrast. The quiet man and the woman who carried more power than she showed, standing in a moment neither of them had planned, but both understood. Elena took a breath, not because she needed it, but because what came next mattered. "My name is Elena Cross," she said, formal now defined. And I believe you already understand that last night was not as simple as it looked. Marcus did not react with surprise, not because he knew, but because he did not assume. Nothing is ever as simple as it looks, he replied, and for the first time, something shifted in Elena's expression. Not a smile, not quite, but recognition, the kind that confirmed what she had already begun to see. She gestured lightly toward the car, not as an order, not as an expectation, but as an invitation. I would like to speak with you, she said, not here, not like this. Marcus glanced briefly at the building behind him, then back at her, weighing not the offer, but the intention behind it, because offers could be many things, but intention revealed everything. The city continued moving around them, unaware, unchanged, but in that quiet space between decision and action, something undeniable had formed, not because of power, not because of circumstance, but because two people had met at the same point of truth, one who had been watching, and one who had simply been himself. And now, for the first time, Marcus Hale had to decide whether to step into a world that had already begun to step toward him. Marcus did not rush his answer, because rushing had never been part of who he was. He looked at Elena Cross, not at the car, not at the driver waiting silently inside, but at her, measuring something that could not be written down or explained in a single sentence. The city noise moved around them in soft waves, footsteps passing, engines humming, the ordinary continuing without pause. And yet the moment between them held its own kind of stillness. I have work, Marcus said finally, not as a refusal, not as an excuse, but as a statement of fact. Elena nodded once, as if she expected nothing less. So do I, she replied, her tone calm, matching his without effort. A brief pause followed, not empty, but balanced. Then she added, that is why this matters. Marcus considered that. Not the words alone, but the weight behind them, the kind that suggested this was not a casual conversation, not an opportunity placed lightly. He glanced once toward the building behind him, then back at her. 10 minutes, he said, simple, measured. Elena inclined her head slightly, not negotiating, not pushing, just accepting. 10 is enough, she answered, and with that the boundary was set, not by her, but by him, and that mattered more than either of them said out loud. They did not get into the car. Instead, Elena gestured toward a small cafe across the street, quiet, nearly empty at this hour, a place where conversations could exist without audience. They walked side by side, not speaking, not needing to fill the space. Inside, the scent of coffee and warm bread softened the edges of the morning. They took a table near the window, light filtering through glass, steady and clear. A server approached, but Elena raised a hand gently. Just water, she said, then looked to Marcus. He nodded. Same. The server left, and the silence returned, not awkward, not strained, just present. Elena rested her hands lightly on the table. Fingers relaxed, but her gaze was precise. You asked if there was a problem, she began, her voice even. There is not. Marcus did not interrupt, did not lean forward. He simply listened, the way he always did, fully, without trying to control what came next. There is a pattern, she continued, and I do not ignore patterns. Marcus's eyes held hers, steady, grounded. Patterns of what? He asked, not defensive, not curious in a superficial way, but genuinely seeking clarity. Elena allowed a small breath before answering. Of character, she said, the words settling between them with quiet weight. The server returned, placing 2 glasses of water on the table, the sound of glass meeting with soft but distinct. Then, leaving them again, Marcus wrapped his hand loosely around the glass, not drinking yet. You watched, he said, not accusing, not surprised, just acknowledging what had already been revealed. Elena did not deny it. Yes, she replied. Last night, and this morning, and just now. Marcus nodded once, accepting that without reaction, because being seen did not change who he was. And, he asked, simple, direct. Elena leaned back slightly, not to create distance, but to see him more clearly. And you did not change, she said, not when people laughed, not when no one was watching, not when you were approached. Marcus's expression remained calm, but there was a subtle shift, not in emotion, but in understanding. I am not sure what you are looking for, he said, honest without pretense. Elena met his gaze without hesitation. I am not looking, she replied. I already found it. A brief silence followed, deeper this time. Not because words had run out, but because meaning had settled in. Marcus finally took a small sip of water, setting the glass back down with care. And what does that mean for me? He asked, not hopeful, not skeptical, just grounded in reality. Elena did not answer immediately because this was the moment that defined everything. Not her power, not his situation, but the space between them. It means, she said slowly, that I am offering you something most people would ask for, negotiate for, or try to impress their way into. She paused, just long enough to let the weight of that settle. And I want to see if you will refuse it. Marcus did not react the way most would. There was no surprise, no sudden shift in posture, just a quiet stillness that returned, deeper now, more deliberate, because the question was not about opportunity, it was about intention. And in that moment, the test was no longer hidden. It was clear, not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. And the answer he would give next would not just define what came after, it would confirm everything she had already begun to believe about him. Marcus did not answer immediately, not because he was unsure, but because he understood something most people overlooked, that the value of a moment was not in how quickly you responded, but in whether your response remained true when everything around you suggested it should change. He rested his hands lightly on the table, fingers relaxed, his gaze steady on Elena Cross, the quiet hum of the cafe settling into the background like a distant echo. Then I will save you the time, he said finally, his voice calm, measured. I am not interested. There was no edge to it, no resistance, just clarity, the kind that did not need to defend itself. Elena did not flinch, did not react with surprise or disappointment. Instead, something almost imperceptible shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not quite, but something closer to confirmation. You do not even know what I am offering, she replied, not as a challenge, but as a statement placed gently in front of him. Marcus gave a slight nod, acknowledging that truth without stepping away from his own. You are right, he said, but I know what I am not looking for. The words settled between them, quiet, firm, and, for a moment, the world outside the window seemed to pause, not because anything had changed, but because something had been revealed. Elena leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving his. And what is that? She asked, not pressing, not probing, but inviting him to define himself in his own terms. Marcus took a breath, not heavy, not dramatic, just enough to steady the thought he already understood. I'm not looking for a shortcut, he said. I'm not looking for someone to fix my life, or replace the work it took to build it. His tone did not rise, did not harden. It remained the same as it had been from the beginning, grounded, unshaken. What I have, I earned, he continued. And what I do not have, I will earn the same way. Elena listened without interruption, without the need to redirect or reframe, because this was the answer she had been waiting for, not the words themselves, but the foundation beneath them. A man who did not reach when something was placed in front of him, a man who did not bend when opportunity came wrapped in power, a man who stood in the same place. Regardless of who was watching, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something rare, something that could not be bought, negotiated, or influenced. And in that silence, Elena allowed herself the smallest exhale, not of relief, but of certainty. Good, she said softly, and that single word carried more weight than anything she could have added. Marcus did not ask why, did not question her response, because he had not answered for her approval. He had answered because it was the truth. Elena reached into her bag and placed a simple card on the table, sliding it toward him without urgency, without insistence. I was not offering to fix your life, she said, her voice steady. I was offering to invest in it. Marcus looked at the card, but